I'll wait a moment or two until we have a few more people with us. I see that we have some of our group with us, but I'm going to give this a minute or two more just to let a few more people sign on. We're right at noon now. It looks like we have a lot of our group with us, so I think I'll begin. I'm Tom Saunders, President and CEO of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, and I want to thank you all so much for joining us today. We are at this point at the Conservancy celebrating quite a milestone, and that is that the Conservancy has just passed its 90th anniversary mark. And so we thought this was a good opportunity to tell you about the programs that we have been doing recently, the projects we've gotten done, and the programs and projects that are underway. As I look back over recent years at the Conservancy, the thing that always impresses me is just the breadth of our work and frankly, just how much our staff and board and volunteers get done. From our land protection work to our watershed, our natural heritage program, our gardens and green space work, urban forestry, Fallingwater. There just are always so many projects underway, and in recent years, so many innovations that it stays interesting and challenging every day. As I look back over time, I will recall that back at our 75th anniversary, we had done some very large land acquisitions that we cleverly called our 75th anniversary acquisitions to celebrate that milestone. And so as we look today at what's underway, we're focusing particularly on projects of the last 15 years since that 75th anniversary acquisition. And at the outset, I just want to say that we get done what we accomplished because of you all, because of our members, our volunteers, our supporters, the individuals, the foundations that support us, and then our incredibly wonderful and energetic and smart staff and our wonderful board that supports us in all we do. So with that, I will just turn to a quick description of some of the projects underway. And I will say at the outset that if you want to use the Q&A function, feel free to type in questions. And because we've kept this to an hour, we'll probably end up responding to you after the program in response to the questions. We'll do that individually, but feel free to put in any questions if you have them. And so I'm going to start with, well, of course, my screen is not advancing. So there we go. So I'm going to start with High Meadow. And Nicole, if I can just, or Jenny, I'm going to just check on chat to make sure that my sound is coming through all right, because now I'm seeing a microphone mute button that I didn't see before. If somebody can just respond back and tell me that sound is still good, I'll appreciate that. I'm going to look at the answers here for a second. Thank you very much. So I'm going to start with projects we have done in recent years at Fallingwater. And this one is just an incredible change out of the Fallingwater site. This is what used to be called the Kirkpatrick House. And our goal a number of years ago was to create a real center for our convenings, as we say, our educational forums, our on-site artists in residence, all the different kinds of educational projects we do. And so we expanded this building. We did it in a way that had minimal impact on the land, and it didn't compete in the sense of design competition with the iconic design of Fallingwater, but in itself is a beautiful site, I think, which has allowed us to really add depth to our educational programming at Fallingwater. And that's consistent with the early goals and vision of the Kaufman family as they were out at the site. And then as we did that project, we also, again, I can't get my slides to advance. We also updated what had been the garage at the Kirkpatrick House and turned it into this design studio where we can have students out and do on-site engineering projects, design projects. And it's just been wonderful to have this facility for students. And then we've done so many improvements around the site. We took what was the old visitors parking lot and we changed it so that it's sustainable. It has native plants, it handles more cars, it has bioswales in between the parking lots, and therefore it does not give it does not have an impact on the Bear Run watershed. It handles the rainwater much more successfully than before. And so that's a subtle change, but a big site change at Fallingwater. And then we've expanded the visitors pavilion by adding this education pod. So it gives us another place for educational events, and this time closer to Fallingwater itself, up at the visitors pavilion and in this nice relaxed outdoor setting that works well with the original design of the visitors pavilion. We've done subtler, smaller projects, and there are others, but I'll show this one. This is the former maintenance shop, which was close to the entrance to the Fallingwater site, and we converted it into a visitor services building. And so I considered not including this, but I think it's good for our members and volunteers to know sort of all these behind the scenes projects, the range of different projects we've been doing there. We have renovated the Bear Run Schoolhouse that's out on 381 in front of Fallingwater. And then as we have acquired properties over the years that have become the Bear Run Reserve around Fallingwater, many of them have these farmhouses, vernacular houses and architecture of different periods. And over the last few years, we've renovated these two, the Oler House and the Ream House, to be used for interns. So it's nice to be able to work on the different historic periods that surround the Fallingwater site and that make up the sort of the architectural and design context of the Bear Run Reserve overall. And then this next project's just beautiful. This is Hickman Chapel, a little bit farther south on 381. And that congregation had reached an unsustainable size of one person. And so the owners, the congregation, reached out to us and asked us if we would be willing to take over the site. And we did. And that was an interesting, complex process because it also was the end of the corporate entity, and it was subsumed into the Fallingwater Western Pennsylvania Conservancy organization. But what an incredibly simple, beautiful building, and what an important part of the landscape as you drive down 381 toward Ohio Pile. So we were very glad to be able to help the community with that. And then also over this last 15 years, since the last milestone we celebrated, we've added more and more to the content of what happens at Fallingwater. So this is Felix De La Concha, one of our more renowned artists in residence, and he did 50 paintings like the one here that were then exhibited afterwards. And that artist in residence program has continued, with our most recent one being Stephentown's. He has an exhibit now at the Westmoreland Museum of American Art called Stephentown's Declaration and Resistance. And it examines the American dream through lives of Black Americans from the late 18th century to the present time. So again, that emphasis on intellect, content, culture, communication, education, art is so much in keeping with what the original vision was for Fallingwater as the Kaufman shared that site with the community. We've made a lot of technological changes. This is a laser scan project that was done so that the whole site now is kind of archived into these little digital points that can be an electronic way of arranging the archival information about the building, the contents, the art, everything about the site. And then recently we have installed solar panels so that we can offset the energy usage at Fallingwater, not the whole site yet, but at Fallingwater itself, through these solar panels that were installed in a place that's pretty out of the way and does not have a visual impact, but brings that nice advancement in sustainability. And then we've made improvements to the trails, the steps. This is the return path to the visitor center. We've improved the information about being able to hike and use the trails. So this is a new kiosk up behind the barn that tells information about the site and the trails for people who are going out there to hike. And then, of course, the really big accomplishment. This is bigger than anything else that happened in the 15 years. And this is the point at which we achieved World Heritage listing through a 20-year process with UNESCO. And in a way, it was just the biggest milestone in the history of Fallingwater, or since the time it was donated to the Conservancy. And so, very soon after we got that designation and began to gear up for more visitorship and more preservation work, the pandemic happened. And so Fallingwater took a different kind of shift, and our staff there did incredible programming. And this is just one example. This is a partnership we did with the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra, where they did a virtual program called Front Row. And in that series, they went out to different sites. And so this particular day, members of the symphony orchestra performed out at Fallingwater, and that was made available live and virtually. And then we also moved into the issue of community needs, because during the pandemic, there were a lot of people struggling without incomes and without food. And so we did sufficient food. And so we did food distributions at Fallingwater, partnering with 412 Food Rescue. And so, in a way, I thought it was an interesting opportunity and set of challenges for our organization to see how much it could kind of rethink how we work, the way we work, what we do during the pandemic. And it was wonderful to see some of these new activities at Fallingwater. So I'll turn to our Gardens and Green Space program. And in that program also, just so many changes, so much advancement, so much more complex work in a way, and so much work that ties in with the kind of the ecological goals of the organization overall. So we have historically had, for quite a number of years, around 130 gardens. But during the recent years, we've been taking some of those gardens and expanding them and kind of adding depth to what they accomplished. And so this is the one at Center and Heron in the city, where we did have a garden, but we have changed it and retrofitted it in a giant way so that it now helps remove rainwater, stormwater when there are high rainwater events. That rainwater can now be managed on site. And so that helps with what you all know is a problem with Pittsburgh's combined sewer overflow when there are rain events that are essentially too heavy for our infrastructure. So as a conservation organization, we know that that does not have to be addressed entirely through complex infrastructure changes. Much of that can be addressed in a natural way on site. And in this particular garden, this was the outcome. And that shows it right after it was replanted. But after a mere, and that was in 2018, but after a mere 1,000 volunteer hours and 19,000 new perennials, that site now manages 1 million gallons of annual runoff. And it does it right there on site, so that water doesn't go into the cities and regions' overall sewage and stormwater infrastructure system. So just one example, but a way that the Conservancy has been sort of deepening the nature of the gardens and green space work. And then we've continued to work so much in that program with schools and with school kids. We've done a program we called School Grounds Greening, where we work with virtually every public school in the city, 66 different schools, and where there had not been nice landscape features on the school sites before, there are now. So we work with places like early childhood centers and added landscapes like this, places where the kids can sit outside, have outdoor classroom experiences. and they're beautiful. They just are assets to the school grounds now. It's wonderful to work with the kids as we do these projects, and then as they're maintained over time. This is another one where we just completely transformed the way that school grounds looks and how the kids can use it. And then in addition to the gardens and the schools work, our urban forestry program didn't exist if we looked back, or didn't exist at any scale if we looked back to the 75th year anniversary. So since then, we've done a program called Tree Vitalize and other urban forestry projects, where we're now at 37,000 street trees and park trees that we've added in the city of Pittsburgh and the neighborhoods around it. In addition to all urban trees that we've added, we've done a very specific project called the Red Bud Project. And this is an enhanced photo of what we expect this to look like as the red buds bloom out more and more. And in fact, you'll see them blooming in the next couple of weeks. But we have added in the thousands of red buds and other native plants visible from the riverbanks of Pittsburgh and along downtown's edges, so that you'll see this beautiful display of what's a native tree for Pennsylvania. We work with communities around the region. This is Clairton, where we go out to the community and kind of let them tell us what they want to have happen from among the services that our Gardens and Green Space program can provide. So here we've taken what was just a parking lot site and added these natural swales or landscape. They're beautiful. They handle the water on site. And then we've done the same kind of assessment work for the county parks. We've partnered with the Allegheny County Parks Foundation and our staff and Heritage and our land conservation group and our Gardens and Green Space staff have worked together to, well, primarily the Heritage and the Gardens and Green Space staff have worked together to assess how the parks could evolve into different ecological approaches. For example, taking places that had been just mowed as grass lawn and turning them into native pollinator gardens, essentially. And that has had beautiful results in many of the parks, and these are two that have been done most recently or are underway now. And then our Gardens and Green Space staff continues with beautiful work downtown. We do over 1,000 total combined planters and baskets. You see them along the sidewalk, and then if you squint deeper into this photo, they're the planters are clustered at that intersection, and you can just see what a visual impact this has on downtown. An image of one of the baskets, and we do those downtown. We do them across the bridges to the north of downtown, and then some other communities around the region. So the Natural Heritage Program also has just done sort of extraordinary advancements in the last 15-year period. And of course, one of the biggest changes for them is that while climate change was and has been an issue for some while, the knowledge about its impacts and threats and the gravity of the issues have become more profound. And so it really crosses over into so many aspects of the work the Conservancy does, but particularly the work that the Heritage Program does. So this is just one example. This is a study that was done that informs a lot of our land conservation and other work that shows key corridors to connect as temperatures rise, climates change. But in addition to that, we've also done analyses or we've carried down other organizations' national analysis into Pennsylvania so that we have great information at this point about geophysical settings that should be protected the most. And that means different land types that we need to preserve and preserve their function on as climates change. Resilience, meaning properties that will be particularly resilient as temperatures get warmer. And the actual sequestration value of properties. We have that work and study underway right now. And that allows us to rank properties according to how much the grasses or the agricultural crops or the forests on them might actually store carbon. So that kind of work has advanced tremendously, always data-driven, technology-driven, model-driven, very cutting-edge work being done by our Heritage Group. And then, as I described that sort of massive, large-scale issue, climate change, I would say that another one that factors into so much of our work across the organization, and particularly in Heritage, is invasive species work. So there again, we use technology. We have a program called IMAP where people can plug in and share data about where the invasive species are, how they're being controlled, best steps, best practices. And then we coordinate with so many different groups just to try to identify, locate, and then control invasive species in places around the state. Technology, again, this is a new tool or kind of a website feature that's made available for people to use called Conservation Explorer. And so now as developers are looking at possible new sites in Pennsylvania, or energy companies are looking at where they might site things, this information is available in a really early manageable fashion. And in this image, you can see some of the sorts of data that you can pull up there on the list on the right. And so, our approach has been that the Conservancy has this extraordinary range of data, and we want to make it available for people to use in really smart ways about endangered species and their habitats, climate, and all these issues. And then we've continued to work on specific endangered species and their threatened species and their habitats. So the piping plover up in Erie County at Gull Point at Presque Isle State Park, this is a site where it had kind of lost its natural habitat and had changed conditions so much that it had not been used as a roosting site for decades. And so our staff took over that management and did the physical management, them and contractors, and got that site back in the kind of habitat condition where now the species is back on the site and appearing there and roosting there. Another example is the green salamander, which is also a species that had very limited locations in our state. We knew very little about it if we look back a number of decades, but our staff has been studying the locations, for example, in these sandstone crevices, which is primarily where they live. And so now we have the data about where this rare species is and how to protect it. Similarly, the eastern Massasauga, which is a small, very rare rattlesnake, and this is someone in our staff who has put so much work and effort and commitment into saving the species and their habitat, helping with management of the habitat, so it's being done just right for the rattlesnake. And then, of course, the key issue for our heritage staff has been helping bat species, the 11 species in Pennsylvania. Many had begun to be imperiled by white nose disease. And with that, the populations had dropped down by as far as 90 or 95%. So our staff has been doing those studies, locating the bats that have survived, studying the caves where they live, being a part of studies about what temperature should be in the caves. We bought a cave system in the central part of the state that we did in part because of that protective aspect for the bats. We help with, as a state agency is managing that cave. We've installed bat boxes like the one there on the left done by our volunteers. So our heritage staff overall has been deeply involved in continuing to protect native species around the state and then focusing in on these ones that are just so important or so imperiled. And we're so fortunate at the Conservancy because I really don't know other land trusts where there's so much depth of that kind of cutting edge new knowledge about species and their habitats as then the other arms of our organization do work, for example, to protect properties. So I use that as a segue to talk about protecting properties. Our land conservation staff has also gotten amazing things done. So I'm starting here at Ligonier Valley, where over the last 15 years, we have added 27 more conservation easements, 2,700 protected acres. It's brought us up to 10,000 protected acres overall in the Ligonier Valley. And then we've done new projects in places that have been real legacy areas for us. During the 90s and the 2000s, we did a lot of land protection along the Clarion River. It used to be very polluted, very damaged. And then as we knew it was going to be cleaned up and sort of brought back into health, it would probably get a lot of impact from vacation homes and camps. And so we have been able to step in and buy what's now over 12,000 acres of protected land along the Clarion. And we have done a new big project there where we bought the land and then recently transferred it over to the federal government. And we continue to fill in the last few gaps there as best we can in terms of land protection along the Clarion River. Same with the French Creek watershed north of Pittsburgh. So there, we and our partners have protected 62,000 acres at this point. We've done 5,600 acres ourselves. We've added 21 more properties up in the French Creek watershed in the last 15 years. We've added 2,600 more acres. So an interesting thing to me about the Conservancy, and some of you all will have heard me say this before, is that as you do some land conservation work, you kind of have an feeling, you know, a feeling that you may have protected that property, but the land development patterns and the sprawl are just going to overtake what you're doing, that the impact won't be big enough of this work. So that's not true with the Conservancy. We do this work at such scale, and we keep going after these places year after year and decade after decade, that there really is going to be this long-term impact of swaths of protected land. And it's very satisfying to know that the work you do over a period at the Conservancy adds up to a part of that really valuable long-term outcome. Periodically, I can almost say occasionally, we do a really giant land conservation project, and this is the Claremont one that we did up in McKean County a few years ago, 2015, I think. 17,000 acres, added it to state forest, big complex deal. And while we do more that are in the 100 and 200 and 300 and 500 acre ranges, maybe to do these really huge projects is satisfying, is complicated and very expensive, but also satisfying to do, and is a part of why the state forests end up as large as they do over time. And then one of our broadest focuses overall, I mentioned Ligonier Valley, but just overall, the Laurel Highlands has continued to be one of our key focus areas. And the additional projects done there, and the new ways of doing them, and the ways we think now about, I won't say new things, but so much more creative data-based emphasis on climate change and connectivity, on GIS modeled view sheds. It's just wonderful to see. So in the Laurel Highlands, we've added 61 more properties and 11,000 more acres over the last 15 years. This is one of the sites which was added to Ohio State Park. And then another one called Casey Lane that we added to Laurel Hill Creek State Park. And again, there, while there are vacation homes and mountain places and all being built in the Laurel Highlands, that's okay, because in other places, there's also a lot of land protection being done. And so we have a combination of, a reasonable amount of economic development in places where people can live and enjoy, but also, a really healthy pattern of land protection for that region. 86,000 protected acres in the Laurel Highlands, just by our organization. I can be modest because I'm not the one who does it. It's the amazing staff in that department who get it done. We've started a new initiative. One of the fun things about the last 15 years has just been, while it's all within the framework of our mission statement and our strategic plan, we have started quite a number of interesting new initiatives. And this one was a GIS model of lands to protect that would be the most important for the views along the Great Allegheny Passage. We went after grants for funding for that study. We did the study, and then we have done 8 properties. We've acquired 8 properties so far since then and protected 700 acres, and have this underway as we add more properties to that. It's been fun to do this project, which has been assisting local land trusts with loans out to them. So usually we're raising money and we're talking about how we need money for things, but there is one arena or a few where we help smaller organizations. The Watershed Office gives out grants to small land trusts. We have a grant specifically for that. And the land staff gives out revolving funds, brief loans, to local land trusts who are doing land protection deals, but just need the funding gap filled most often while they wait for a state grant to come in. And so this is the last of those loans we gave out, the most recent one. We've done 8 more in the last 15 years. And this one was to Somerset County Conservancy, to a beautiful place where they keep adding protected land. So, I think it's really important that we work with and appreciate and support all our partners in this work, and those loans are one way we can do that. And then, as I mentioned, new initiatives. This has been a fun one and a challenging one, I will say. We have added a farmland access initiative. The Conservancy had done farmland protection for years and years, decades and decades. But like a lot of land trusts, I think we began to see a pattern where, yes, we were protecting the farmland, but were we helping it to stay in farming? Were we helping farmers get on that land? And so we decided to address that issue head on. And so we went to 5 foundations and asked for grants. They generously funded a pilot program in this. We went out and bought several farms, and we are now holding those farms. So a lot of our farmland protection before was the farms other people owned that we have under easement. But in this program, we're buying them and then releasing them out at very reasonable rates to farmers. And we're helping the farmers be successful in the land and to add more local foods and organic foods to the Pittsburgh food region, the food supply for this region. As I say, it's been complicated because to do this work is hands-on. You got to make it successful. You're working with these farmers, some of them every month, some of them every week. And it's a pilot program for these 4 to see how large scale we may or may not want to make that over the years, but it's been wonderful to begin to test this out. And then in our land protection staff, the stewardship program staff do just incredible work. Andy Zadnik leads that group, and he's forever applying for small grants and getting them and being able to do improvements on different properties. So this map shows the 40,000 acres sites that we have under conservation easement and the over 40 preserves that we have that we make available to the public. And we've done so many improvements to them during the pandemic. People's interest in getting out and walking and hiking has been strong during the pandemic. And of course, there was a period during the complete lockdown where it's kind of about all you could do was to get outside and go walk somewhere near where you lived. So we actually did a campaign to raise awareness about our properties. It was called 41 Places. Donors gave us $600,000 for that. So that was just wonderful and incredible. And we have done things like this work at Tom's Run, which wasn't in all that great condition 10 years ago. But to Andy's credit and his staff, we have capped the gas wells out there. We've demolished the tumble down buildings that needed demolition. We have added a parking lot with native plants around it that you see in the middle photo here, signage like that little informational sign you see on the left. And we've done a beautiful 3-mile trail loop that people in Pittsburgh can go out and get to and walk very easily. Other examples in other places, we've continued to work at this beautiful site called Wolf Creek Narrows, where we're adding a trail or we're expanding the trail loop that's there with a new trail connection over to a new parking lot. And this is just another image there of one of the beautiful field portions of Wolf Creek Narrows. A lot of it is wooded. Out at Bear Run, we've really changed things. I showed the kiosk earlier at the trailhead, but we also completely reworked those trails. Andy and his crew and volunteers work on them all the time. We've gotten them in better condition. People were kind of attached to the old trail names, but nevertheless, it was confusing to go walk 3/4 of a mile on something called the Hemlock Trail and then take a turn on the something else trail and try to find your way back. And so we reworked those trails into 6 different loops, and they just couldn't be more straightforward. Famous last words, I'll go get lost in one. But you can now choose, your 11-mile loop or your 3-mile loop or your 1-mile loop and just follow the sort of the color coding for that loop and do it. And we have over 28 miles of trails there. So that's those trails are a real feature and service for our community and our region. And then we've done so much work to increase accessibility. I mean, that's one of the reasons behind the new paved parking lots. They tend to have a few ADA places. We've applied for grants and we've put in features like this. This is a floating dock up at Lake Pleasant so that people who have limitations or disabilities can get a canoe or a kayak into the water more easily. And we do a lot of that kind of work on our properties now. And then I'll just mention here that all this work and all these programs, I said this at the beginning, but I'll say it in a more specific way, that we just couldn't do this work without the funding that comes in from individuals and small family foundations and the larger foundations, corporations, and all kinds of partners. And so this is an image from the campaign we did 2010 through 2015, and we ended up bringing in close to $60 million. It was intended to be a $40 million campaign. And we put just a little bit of that aside if those are the donor's wishes in endowment or investment assets, but a very small percent. And most of it went into these incredible outcomes of land protection work and wonderful watershed projects, in endangered species work, gardens and green space projects, work in Fallingwater. And we are quietly thinking it will be time for another campaign before too long. But the participation by our donors in that was incredible. So I want to end with our watershed program. They're just such a group of hard workers and entrepreneurs. Everyone is in all our programs. Sometimes I think this work is done a little more quietly. And in a way, it's just incredibly inspiring to know that the work they do is helping to clean up our rivers and streams across the region every day. I mean, we have 15 staff out right now, doing stream bank work or abandoned mine drainage work or planting trees somewhere today, I am sure. So this is a stream that was just planted with new small trees. Right now, they're in these plastic tree tubes. And it's just one example, but to extrapolate out to the many streams on which this has been done, since 2013, we've planted 66,000 riparian trees around the region. And again, I can be modest because they're the ones out there doing all that. But I just think it's an incredible number and an incredible accomplishment by that group. We have been doing unassessed waters work, as that program is called, where we look at the streams that don't yet have classifications about how they should be protected. And we do studies to see whether they have native trout or other species in them. And then based on the outcome of that field work, some of our staff and helpers out there doing it. We had lots of helpers during the pandemic. Based on the outcomes of that, then those streams end up classified by the state for protection and more eligible for grants that can then allow some of the program work to keep being done to improve the stream health. And then another just giant scale project across the region is that we have done a study of connectivity of how well aquatic species can pass through different streams. And so this is just an example of one of those projects where the before situation is the one on the left. And you look at that little culvert, it's high up above the stream level. How are species going to get downstream through that to the next part of the stream? You don't want to think about how well that's not going to go. And then they can't move back upstream. So think about climate change. They can't move back and forth to find areas that are shaded or not, depending on what they need, or that are, cool, places to sort of tuck away in different parts of the stream. They can't find the habitat they're looking for if it's all bisected into different culverted segments. So it's a funny thing that I think, most of us just don't realize that our streams are all chopped up by culverts and dams everywhere into these different segments. So we've been analyzing that, and the most important ones to begin to remove and replace, and doing projects like the ones like the image here on the right, where we replace that little pipe with one where the water can actually move through. Some of our staff are showing the scale here, so that you can see the size of the new one that's gone in. We do the same thing with dams, with pipes under bridges all over the region. And here's just a mapped example of one of those. This is out of the Dunbar Creek watershed in the Laurel Highlands, where we've taken out 4 different dams. And by doing that, we have opened up 50 miles of streams for free flow. We did that back in 2018. And then the watershed staff has turned around and done this other project in the same watershed, where we have found the funding for and then partnered with others to do this, this huge abandoned mine drainage project, where because the polluted water keeps pouring out of the mines, we have built these systems that will gradually filter that water until it ends up clean as it goes back into the stream just downstream. As I said, I did the same thing with the heritage program. I kind of talked about some of the broad work they do, and then I focused in on some species. And it's just the same with the watershed group. So they do these big, regional or, or multi-county projects or approaches, but they also will focus in on specific areas and specific species. And so here are staff working on mussels in the Allegheny River. A bridge called the Hunter Station Bridge was removed and replaced across the Allegheny River. And as that was done, we were consulted and contracted with to save and move the mussels under the bridge. So here you can see this grid pattern that was created in the stream where we could use that for future monitoring. We got the mussels out of the site. We moved them to different places. They're actually transported to different rivers. And one of the amazing things that resulted from that is that through this process, a lot of them were, the common ones were transported into the Clarion River. And I mentioned earlier that the Clarion used to be so contaminated that mussels wouldn't have lived in it. And now that stream health of that river is so restored that we could move mussels there and they're surviving. We sometimes will go into areas and work with lots of different owners, and that's a really fun thing to do because I mentioned this in connection with the land protection work, but you don't want a feeling that you've worked on one little site, but there's so much of the rest of that stream that's in bad shape that you're not going to have an impact over time overall. And so this is up in the Broken Straw in Warren County, and here we've worked with something like 16 landowners, then we have another 20 something that we're going to work with next, and one by one, working with these landowners as the partners because it's their land, and doing stream bank stabilization work, tree planting work, planting live stems, small live stems that will grow into plants along the stream banks, and going back to grant sources over and over to have different stages of this project where we'll finish work with a number of landowners and then go line up more and go seek more funds and come back and work with other property owners. So I just mentioned it because it's kind of heartwarming that it's just such a collaborative effort with the people who own the land, and that so many people are interested in doing this. It's the Broken Straw also in another area. And then as far as locations, I'm going to end up at Bennett Branch Forest. So I showed some images of Bear Run around Fallingwater, and you all know that Bear Run is our really preeminent site in the region, our largest reserve. But our second largest one is Bennett Branch Forest. It's up north, closer to St. Mary's and Ridgeway. And a lot of our different staff work on that. The person who ran our land group stood up in front of the board, I think it was back in 2010, no, it was 2008, and said, we should keep this property ourselves because it has so many issues that we should show, we should do what needs to be done on it. Our organization may be able to do that best. And that turned out to be a really big statement because there's been a lot to do. But Matt Marusiak has headed up a long ongoing process to improve the forest health. That forest was even aged, as it was called, meaning that it had been cut at different times, but all of it cut, so then all of it came back up to the same age and height, essentially. And so what we've done is staggered cuts, staggered harvests that will allow it to end up uneven aged over time, if that makes sense, and also with a mix of Pennsylvania native species appropriate to the region. So complex work with consultants and our own staff working together. And then at the same time we have done that, we've added trails, we have added information and educational signing, but we've also done some other really huge projects. So this site in the image off to the left is an example of where that property has had remnants of mine impacts ranging from long walls, tall cliffs, something called a red dog pile, a lot of residue from the mining operations that were there. And this is the same site there in the image on the right where we have had that smoothed out, which you can imagine how large and expensive a project that it is. And gradually we will help as that land is reclaimed, as it's replanted and reforested and goes back to a much more safe and ecologically appropriate and natural state. And then check out the scale of this project. So this has also been at Branch Forest. And this drone image gives you a sense of the land and how large scale it is. This is just a part of the, I'm not sure I said the acres right. This is a part of the roughly 1,500 acres at Bennett Branch Forest. But this is where we're treating abandoned mine drainage up on this property. And we've added this series of holding ponds so that essentially through natural filtration, the water will move from one pond to the next. And then by the time it goes back into the stream at the downstream point you're seeing off to the left, it will be clean as it works its way on down to Bennett Branch. And much of this is legacy work that was inspired by one of our board members, Doc Blakesley, who lived up in this area. Professionally, his work was different. He was a physician. He passed away about a decade ago, I guess now, and he was just always so inspired about doing land protection work and watershed work and bringing the Bennett Branch back to health, that it's been a real pleasure to know that we're honoring his aspirations in an ongoing way as we do this very challenging work. Kudos to our watershed staff, because they had to raise $2 million to do this project. They clearly don't just happen, and then manage this scale of construction, which frankly has been new to the Conservancy to do A&D projects ourselves this large. So the wonderful staff who've worked on them have just been extraordinary. That's another image of the Bennett Branch Forest and the A&D work there. And for my very last slide in the watershed program, I'll show this because it's not all about the science and the ecological restoration work. We also want people to know and enjoy our streams. And so we have, due to very generous donors, we have a canoe access development fund, and we put in what we create put-ins for canoes and takeout points for canoers and kayakers, and we've now done over 75 of them around the region. So this is just an example of a sojourn day where people are out pedaling and enjoying the rivers and streams that we're making more accessible to people. So with that, I just want to kind of wrap up with the present and the future. That is just an overview of some of the projects underway at 90 years. And I know how incredibly appreciative I am every day of the wonderful staff and board who allow all these projects to happen, but also for all your support and interest and generosity. And then as we look ahead, during this last 15 years, oh, I'm sorry, I have one more slide here. Those are the locations for the canoe accesses that we have built over the last number of years. So as we look ahead, we are looking ahead to the future and to youth and to diversity and to, you know, all the people that we want to learn more and more about this and have involved in this over the years. So as long as 15 years ago, we created a diversity and inclusion committee and council, and that group has been hard at work and reaching out to very broad audiences across the city and across the region who work together with us on projects. And I hope that that diverse future is the future of the organization. We have added education programs. We had a highly organized set of education programs already for some while at Fallingwater, but over a period of a few strategic plans, we made a concerted effort to organize the education work we do in the conservation programs. And there you see Ephraim Zimmerman, who's on the heritage staff and gets out with school kids a lot of projects like this, activities like this. So we've brought on someone wonderful who heads our education work. We don't really do one-off projects, or like we're not an education organization ourselves. We plug in and partner with others. So we have all these sites around the region that are just such perfect places for school kids to get out and learn about this kind of work, and to allow our staff to get out and, you know, work with the kids who hopefully are going to be the future of organizations like ours. And then likewise, we've created a group that is out volunteering in this image, but they're our Emerging Leaders Advisory Committee. And that is a new committee we've created really just in about the last 3 or 4 years that is made up of young professionals across Pittsburgh and the region, and mostly people in their 20s and their 30s that in some cases have moved on upward to our board, and we hope that will continue to happen. And that kind of spread the word about the organization and what we do, and then filter information into us about what people are interested in getting done, organize events for us, do volunteer projects like this themselves. That committee has just helped to fund one of our garden sponsorships. And from the Diversity and Inclusion Council and those diverse activities to the education work to the Emerging Leaders Group, it is wonderful to know that as we do our work, we involve so many people, including a lot of young adults and a lot of kids, and that hopefully is building a wonderful future for the organization. So I have just about used our hour, and I will end there, but I want to thank you all for joining us on a weekday and for all your enthusiasm and support for everything we do. As I say, we probably aren't going to take questions now just because our time is limited, and we don't want to take too much of your time over lunchtime on a weekday. But if you do have questions, put them in the Q&A. We'll leave that open for a bit, and or contact us afterwards at the information email that we can send out afterwards. And then we look forward to seeing you more and more in person. We will have our annual meeting coming up virtually soon. We have an in-person hike for members coming up in late April, and it's nice to finally have so many of our staff back in our office, and our volunteers and our partners working with us together more and more in either hybrid meetings or fully in person. And we look forward to seeing you all soon. So thank you so much, and we will see you all soon.